What if one speech could change the world? What if the words of a US Congresswoman brought a president to tears and sparked a movement for justice that crossed continents? Stay with me, because what happened next will challenge everything you thought you knew about leadership, dignity, and the power of speaking the truth. Dear friends, what you're about to hear is more than just a story. It's a glimpse into a world where quiet courage reshapes destinies and dignity outshines power. These are the voices often missed by the headlines, but not here. If this kind of storytelling moves you, if it stays with you long after the screen fades, we invite you to subscribe and ring the bell. And before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We read every word. Now let's begin. It started with a simple gift, nothing grand or extravagant, just two wooden figures holding hands, carved from a fallen acacia branch by a young girl in a village half a world away. The child, Fatou Dio, had no idea how that small gesture would reverberate across continents, shifting the course of history. She gave it to the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, with a message so pure that it transcended language and politics. We can be different, but we can still hold hands. Little did she know that this tiny piece of art would become the symbol of a profound movement, one that began in the quiet simplicity of her village and would eventually rock the foundations of global politics. Meanwhile, across the ocean, in the heart of the US Capitol, Jasmine Crockett, a bold and fearless congresswoman, was preparing for a conference that was meant to be just another routine political call. But for her, this wasn't just about diplomacy. She wasn't about to conform to the same scripted speeches. This was her moment to speak from the heart, to say something real, to speak to the core of what she believed in: dignity, justice, and equality. She leaned into the microphone and began to speak, her words carrying the weight of every injustice she had ever witnessed, every person whose voice had been silenced. As the international conference unfolded with leaders from around the world dialing in, no one could have predicted the wave of emotion that would soon sweep through the room. Jasmine's speech wasn't just heard, it was felt deep within the heart of President Traoré. His eyes welled up with tears, not just because of her words, but because for the first time he felt seen. A connection was made that crossed more than just geographical distance. It was a moment of shared humanity, where the line between politician and person blurred, and the world stood still to listen. This wasn't just a speech. It was the spark of a movement that would change everything. What followed would shake not just politics, but the very foundation of how we think about justice, equality, and the power of a single voice. And the question is, what will we do with that power? Jasmine Crockett's voice echoed through the screen with a power few could have predicted. As she prepared for the international conference, she knew the stakes were higher than just political maneuvering or scripted diplomacy. This wasn't just another meeting, it was her opportunity to say something real, something that couldn't be ignored. Surrounded by world leaders and diplomats, most of whom were content with polite exchanges, Jasmine was determined to break through the noise. Her message wasn't about policy or formalities, it was about humanity, about dignity that had been denied for far too long. As she began to speak, the words came not from a rehearsed speech, but from a place deep within her, a place where the weight of racial injustice, economic disparity, and years of silenced voices came crashing together. "I was born into a place where people talk about dignity like it's a luxury," she began, and immediately you could feel the room shift. Her words weren't just words. They were a declaration of truth, a truth that had been buried under layers of political correctness. She spoke of communities where a person's worth was decided by their zip code, where the grocery store was a liquor store, and opportunity was something distant, only available to the fortunate few. As Jasmine spoke, her voice unwavering, the room grew still. This wasn't just another speech, it was a reckoning. For a moment it felt like the world had paused, listening to her raw honesty. But it was the moment when she looked directly into the camera, locking eyes with President Ibrahim Traoré, that everything changed. She wasn't just speaking to the other diplomats on the call, she was speaking to him. "I see you," her words seemed to say, "and I see what you're fighting for." It wasn't a typical diplomatic approach, but it was one that connected on a deeper, human level. The walls of formalities crumbled as the truth hung in the air, undeniable. In that moment, President Traoré, the leader of Burkina Faso, was struck by a realization. Jasmine's speech wasn't just a critique of the systems that oppressed people around the world. It was a mirror reflecting his own struggles, his own fight for justice and sovereignty. What had begun as a simple speech had transformed into a powerful call to action, one that had the potential to spark a change, not just in global politics, but in the hearts of all who heard it. This wasn't just about political boundaries, it was about human dignity. As Jasmine Crockett's words hung in the air, there was a profound silence that enveloped the video call. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, and in that moment President Ibrahim Traoré felt a stirring deep within him, a recognition of something he had not fully realized until now. He had always fought for his country, for his people, striving to maintain Burkina Faso's sovereignty in the face of global pressure and outside interference. But now, as Jasmine spoke with such raw, unfiltered truth, he saw something in her that mirrored his own struggles. She wasn't just speaking about a system, she was speaking to the heart of it. And in doing so, she was forcing him to confront his own leadership and the decisions that weighed on his shoulders. Her words hit harder than any political speech he had ever heard. It wasn't just the facts or statistics she shared, it was the humanity behind them, the lived experience that made her words resonate so deeply. Jasmine wasn't just calling out the systems that oppressed people around the world, she was embodying the resilience of those very people. The vulnerability in her voice, the way she didn't shy away from revealing her own pain and truth, made her message impossible to ignore. For a leader like Traoré, who had worked tirelessly to protect his country from exploitation, it felt as if Jasmine was speaking directly to him, urging him to continue his fight for what was right, no matter the cost. In that moment, the simple act of speaking truth became an act of resistance, one that cut through the layers of diplomacy and political posturing. Traoré could feel the weight of her words as they wrapped around him like a challenge, a reminder that leadership was not just about politics, but about the integrity to stand firm for what was right, even when it meant standing alone. Her speech had moved him to tears, not because of the sorrow it evoked, but because of the undeniable power in her conviction. She had, in those few minutes, managed to break down every wall that separated them, the walls of distance, of politics, and of silence. What followed was more than just a global conversation. It was the beginning of a deeper connection, one that transcended continents and ideologies. Jasmine's words had not only resonated with the president of Burkina Faso, they had sparked something larger, a recognition that the fight for justice was not confined to one nation or one voice. It was a universal struggle, one that demanded action. For President Traoré, this was the moment he knew that his mission and Jasmine's mission were one and the same. It was no longer just about national interests, it was about standing together as people in the fight for dignity and equality. The impact of Jasmine Crockett's speech rippled far beyond the confines of that international conference call. Her words, honest and unapologetic, began a wave of change that spread across continents, igniting conversations on justice, dignity, and the very nature of leadership. What had started as a call to action between two leaders, the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, and the US Congresswoman, soon evolved into something much greater. People from all walks of life, from remote villages in Africa to the bustling streets of Washington, D.C., found themselves inspired by the truth she spoke, a truth that transcended race, nationality, and political affiliations. Across the globe, Jasmine's words gave voice to the oppressed, to those whose struggles had long been ignored by the powerful. For many, her speech was the first time they had heard a leader speak not from a place of power, but from a place of raw, unfiltered humanity. The emotional weight of her message, of sovereignty, of standing up for one's people, and of never compromising on dignity, resonated deeply. President Traoré, having seen firsthand the pressures that came with leadership, saw in Jasmine a reflection of the fight he had been waging for his country. Her call for justice was not just for the marginalized in the US or Africa. It was a universal message for everyone who had ever felt powerless. In the days that followed, this moment sparked something that no one had anticipated, a global movement for dignity and equality, led by the Bridges of Equality Fund that Jasmine Crockett launched. The fund was not about charity, it was about empowerment, about creating sustainable systems that allowed communities to rise above their challenges. The initiative took root in the most underserved areas of both the US and Africa, where local leaders, inspired by Jasmine's words, began organizing and demanding the resources and respect they deserved. What made this movement so powerful was that it was not top-down, it was grassroots, driven by those who had always been at the bottom of the ladder. The voices of the voiceless were finally being heard, not because of political agendas, but because humanity had spoken. Jasmine's message of unity, of standing together despite differences, became the foundation for a new way of thinking, one that believed in collective action, where no one was left behind. This wasn't just a political shift, it was a cultural awakening. And it all started with one speech, one truth, spoken loudly enough to shatter the silence and transform the world. The legacy of Jasmine Crockett and President Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just defined by their speeches or the global reactions they provoked. It was a legacy forged in the quiet moments between words, in the unspoken connections that were made, and in the courage they both displayed in facing the uncomfortable truths about the world. What they had started together, a conversation about justice, dignity, and sovereignty, wasn't just about political policy or international diplomacy. It was about changing the narrative of how leadership should look and how we treat one another, no matter where we come from. For Jasmine, this journey wasn't about gaining accolades or recognition. It was about staying true to the very principles that had driven her from the beginning of her career. The belief that justice is not a privilege, but a right. Her unwavering commitment to speaking from the heart, to cutting through the political noise and revealing the humanity of the struggle, was a message that would continue to resonate for generations. In the Bridges of Equality Fund, Jasmine saw a chance to give back what had been taken from so many, the right to lead, to stand tall, and to be seen as equals. The initiative was more than just a financial endeavor. It was a tangible reminder that the fight for dignity didn't stop at borders. President Traoré, on the other hand, was changed by the interaction in ways that would become visible across his leadership. His actions after the speech revealed a man who understood that real leadership wasn't about what he could take from his people, but what he could give them: respect, hope, and the freedom to shape their own futures. The fight for Burkina Faso's independence wasn't only about resisting foreign pressures or economic manipulation, it was about creating a society where the people were truly at the center of governance. Traoré's reflection on sovereignty and his steadfastness against predatory loans were reaffirmed through Jasmine's words. For him, leadership wasn't defined by global agreements or summits. It was about serving his people with integrity and courage. What both leaders taught the world through their actions wasn't just about big speeches or high-profile movements. It was about seeing the humanity in others, embracing unity, and never shying away from the hard truths. The ripple effect of their shared fight for justice has already begun to change lives, and their partnership across continents and oceans reminds us that true leadership isn't bound by geography or title, it's bound by the heart and the unyielding belief that we are all deserving of dignity. And as Jasmine Crockett and Ibrahim Traoré's work continues, their legacy will live on, inspiring future leaders to rise, speak, and lead with integrity and compassion. The journey of Jasmine Crockett and President Ibrahim Traoré is one of unexpected connections, deep reflections, and global change. What began as a simple, heartfelt speech by a US Congresswoman about justice, dignity, and human rights evolved into a movement that transcended borders and cultures. Jasmine's powerful words reached beyond the political elite, touching the heart of President Traoré, a leader thousands of miles away in Burkina Faso. Her candid message sparked a shift in his understanding of leadership, reaffirming the importance of staying true to one's values even when faced with immense pressure. Their shared commitment to the sovereignty of nations and the dignity of every individual laid the foundation for a new, global conversation about equality and respect. As their partnership flourished, it ignited the Bridges of Equality Fund, a grassroots movement that connected communities across the world, from Africa to the United States, creating lasting change. And this movement showed the world that leadership is not about power, but about service, not about domination, but about empathy. Both Jasmine and Traoré demonstrated that speaking out with honesty and courage can ripple through society, starting conversations that lead to real, transformative actions. Their collaboration was a reminder that true change doesn't come from staying silent, but from standing up for what is right, no matter the cost. Lesson from the story. The story teaches us that leadership is about truth, courage, and empathy. Whether we are leaders of nations or individuals in our communities, the power of our words and actions can create lasting change. In today's world, we must not shy away from speaking our truth, especially when it serves the greater good. Applying this lesson in our daily lives means being brave enough to challenge injustice, advocate for those who have no voice, and always lead with integrity and compassion. Quiz question: what was the key message of Jasmine Crockett's speech? A. Justice is a privilege reserved for a few. B. Justice is a universal right for all. Please comment your answer with either A or B. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this powerful story. How do you think we can apply the lessons from Jasmine and President Traoré in our daily lives? Feel free to share your perspective in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support more inspiring content. Your support motivates us to create even more meaningful stories for you.